Have you ever looked into the eyes of a dog and felt they knew something you didn't? That somehow, beyond words, beyond reason, they saw what was coming before anyone else did? What if the bark you once brushed off as a quirk was actually a warning? In this story, one forgotten pitbull, a gentle girl named Ellie, and a shattered past come together in a way no one could have imagined. What began as an ordinary birthday became a moment that would change lives forever. This isn't just a story, it's a lesson in trust, in instinct, in love. Stay with us until the very end, because the truth hiding in the shadows may be exactly what you need to hear today. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in early spring, the kind where the breeze carries the scent of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. In the backyard of a modest house on the edge of town, a little girl named Ellie celebrated her 7th birthday beneath a string of handmade paper lanterns. Folding chairs circled the lawn. Balloons in pastel colors bobbed gently from the fence. Oh, and laughter echoed as children chased each other with frosting-streaked fingers. It was, in every sense, the perfect day. Ranger lay under the shade of the old oak tree, head resting on his paws. A large, gray-muzzled pit bull with a broad chest and calm eyes. He watched the scene like a retired general quietly observing a parade. Ranger was once a rescue dog, part of a FEMA unit dispatched to New Orleans in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, but that was many years ago. Now, he belonged to the Quinn family, adopted just after Ellie's parents brought her home. To most, he was just the family's sleepy companion. To Ellie, he was everything. The birthday had gone smoothly. Gifts were unwrapped, songs were sung, and Ellie's smile never once faded when her mom, Rachel, brought out the cake, vanilla with pink roses and a toy unicorn on top. The kids cheered. Rachel set the cake on the picnic table with a flourish. "Ready for the candles?" she asked. And that's when it happened. Ranger rose slowly at first, as if something deep inside him had shifted. His ears perked. His nose twitched. Then, without a sound, he bolted from under the tree. For a moment, it seemed like maybe he'd spotted a squirrel, or was reacting to the noise. But what followed was not play. He barked, once, sharp and guttural, and then lunged at the table. The cake flew. It landed upside down in the grass with a soft thud. Icing splattered in the shape of a shattered crown. The children screamed. Rachel gasped. Ellie stepped back, clutching the hem of her dress. Tom, Ellie's dad, ran forward. "Ranger!" What the heck? But the dog didn't flinch. He stood between Ellie and the table, tail stiff, hackles raised, teeth bared. He wasn't looking at anyone. His eyes were fixed on the mangled cake. Then he growled. It was the kind of growl that vibrated through the ground. Not out of anger, but warning. It said, "Stay back." It said, "Something's not right." Walter, Ellie's grandfather, who had been watching from a patio chair, stood slowly. He was a retired cop, long past his days of chasing bad guys, but his instincts hadn't dulled. He looked at Ranger, then at the cake, and he saw it. Embedded in the center of what was once a celebratory dessert was a small metal object, no larger than a thumb. It gleamed faintly in the sunlight. It didn't belong there. "What is that?" Rachel whispered. Tom knelt beside the wreckage and carefully moved a chunk of icing away. "It's some kind of device. Don't touch it," Walter said. Immediately, "Just call someone." Ellie had frozen, wide-eyed and silent. Ranger stayed beside her, body tense, eyes flicking between the object and the people around him. Rachel pulled out her phone and dialed. "I need to report something strange," she told the dispatcher. "It's probably nothing, but our dog just knocked over a birthday cake and we found something in it." Within 15 minutes, a fire engine arrived. 2 uniformed men stepped out, one with gloves, the other with a metal case. They examined the object without picking it up. "Looks like a GPS tracker," one of them said. The words fell over the crowd like a storm cloud. "Tracker? Like someone's watching?" Tom asked. "Could be," the fireman replied. "We've seen similar devices used in theft cases, but in a cake? That's a first. Rachel looked pale. I ordered it online from a bakery website. They even called to confirm. You still have the confirmation? Walter asked. She nodded, already digging through her email. Meanwhile, the kids had been ushered inside. The guests whispered in tight circles. Ranger didn't move. He stayed close to Ellie, who now sat on the porch step, knees pulled to her chest. She didn't speak. She just reached out and laid a hand on his head. He leaned into it, still watching. Walter joined them, lowering himself to the porch slowly. You know, he said quietly, when I was on the force, we had a K9 partner named Duke. Never barked unless it mattered. Saved my life once. Ellie looked up. Did he ever get scared? No, Walter replied. He just knew. They sat like that for a long moment, man, girl and dog, while sirens faded in the distance and wind rustled the balloons. Later that night, as Rachel scrolled through her email history, she noticed something strange. The confirmation message had no reply, address, the bakery's website link, now returned a page not found error. It hadn't come from the real bakery at all. Outside, Ranger lay under the same oak tree where he'd spent the afternoon. His eyes stayed open long after everyone else had gone to bed, watching the shadows, ears twitching at every creak of the wind. He hadn't just ruined a birthday party. He had stopped something before it began, and whatever it was, Ranger wasn't about to let it get anywhere near Ellie again. Before Ranger was the old, quiet dog who slept under the oak tree and watched over a little girl. He was a hero in a vest. He had worn a badge once, a stitched patch that read Search and Rescue, FEMA certified. He'd worked alongside first responders, walked through ash and mud, and found people who would not have been found without him. His unit had deployed to hurricanes, floods, tornado zones, but it was one mission that ended his career, one mission that haunted him. Even now, it had been a collapsed school building, deep in rural Louisiana. Days after the worst of the storm, Ranger had caught the scent of a boy buried beneath a wall of debris. The crew moved fast, digging, clearing. The boy's name was Mason, 7 years old, missing for 2 days. Ranger had barked and scratched, circling the spot with urgency, but they'd been too late. The medics said he'd likely passed just hours before they arrived. Maybe less. Close enough that it felt like failure. After that, Ranger changed. He stopped barking, stopped playing. In the training yard, where he used to race through tunnels and leap over hurdles, he just sat, staring at the far fence, waiting for something that would never come. He was retired soon after. No one wanted to say fired, but it felt like it. Ranger went from national deployments to a small city kennel where he barely lifted his head for visitors. Some said he was broken. Some said he'd been too close to too much loss. Then, hundreds of miles away, on a rainy interstate outside of Omaha, a sedan flipped twice on a slick patch of road. Inside were Rachel Quinn and her husband Tom, along with their adopted daughter Ellie, a quiet little girl with dark hair, wide eyes, and a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. Rachel and Tom made it out with minor injuries. Ellie's parents did not. The child had been traveling with them to visit family. In an instant, she went from someone's daughter to someone's burden. She stopped speaking altogether for a week after the accident. When she finally did, it was just 3 words: I want Ranger. No one knew what she meant. Walter Quinn, Tom's father and a retired police sergeant, had taken the lead in helping Rachel and Tom adjust. They hadn't planned to become full-time parents again, but life had a way of rewriting plans in ink. One afternoon, while Rachel picked up groceries, Walter took Ellie to the shelter to look at animals, hoping maybe a cat or small dog would cheer her up. Ellie didn't smile at the kittens. She didn't react to the beagle that licked her fingers. But when they passed the older pit bull lying motionless at the far end of the kennel, Ellie stopped. That's Ranger, she said softly. Walter blinked. You know him? Ellie nodded, still staring. He helped people. Walter scoffed. He's a pit bull, sweetheart. Probably been in more fights than rescues. But Ranger lifted his head just slightly and looked straight at Ellie. No bark. No movement. Just eye contact. Solid. Steady. A spark of something that had dimmed. Long ago, Ellie kneeled at the gate. "He's sad," she whispered. They took him home that same day. Walter had protested. Loudly. Pitbulls are unpredictable. They snap. You can't trust them. But Tom had grown up trusting his dad's instincts. And he noticed something in Walter's voice. It wasn't fear. It was uncertainty. Something about this dog unsettled him. Not because he was dangerous, but because he didn't fit what Walter thought he knew. That night, Ellie had a nightmare. She screamed in her sleep, calling out for parents who would never come. Rachel rushed in, heart pounding, trying to soothe her. But Ellie thrashed and sobbed. Nothing worked. Until Ranger walked into the room. No one had taught him where her room was. No one had called him, but he went straight to her bed, climbed onto the floor beside it, and let out a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl. More like a hum, like a lullaby made from breath and memory. Ellie quieted. By morning, she was curled against Ranger's side, one small hand gripping his ear. After that, they were inseparable. Wherever Ellie went, Ranger followed. School drop-offs, grocery runs, afternoons in the yard. He was always just a few steps behind her, never crowding, never leading, just there. Rachel started calling him her ghost, not because he was scary, but because he moved so quietly, so consistently, that he almost blended into the edges of their life, always watching, always close. Walter took longer to warm up. He'd spent his whole life judging by the book, by the breed, by the badge. But one morning, he saw Ranger sitting outside Ellie's door before dawn, just sitting, waiting for her to wake up. Walter brought out an old chew toy from his police days. "Let's see if you still got it," he muttered, tossing it a few feet. Ranger didn't chase it. Instead, he looked at Walter like he was asking, "Why?" Walter nodded. "Yeah, I figured." From then on, he stopped complaining, stopped calling him the dog, started calling him partner. Two souls, one battered by loss, the other born into it, had found each other in a world that had taken too much from both, and somehow, without words, they'd built something quiet and strong. Ellie laughed again. Ranger slept again. And for the first time in a long time, the house felt whole. But that was before the cake, before the tracker, before Ranger reminded them all what it meant to be a protector and what it might cost. The day after the birthday party, the air around the house felt different. It wasn't just the ruined cake or the unanswered questions. It was something else, subtle but heavy. Like the way a house feels before a thunderstorm, the kind of pressure you can't quite name, only sense. Tom had taken Ellie to her room to distract her with puzzles, while Rachel stood at the kitchen counter, slowly sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Outside, the swing on the porch swayed gently in the wind. Though there was no breeze, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Walter, sitting in his favorite armchair by the window, clicked through the home security camera footage on a small tablet. Ever since the cake incident, he'd insisted they check every recording. Rachel had rolled her eyes. At first, it was probably just some prank, she'd said. But the expression on Walter's face, as he froze one frame, said otherwise. "Rachel," he said, voice low, "come look at this." She walked over. On the screen was footage from the night before. Around 3 in the morning, a figure moved near the back fence. Distant, blurry, but it was the posture, the way he hovered, not walking past, but watching, that made her skin crawl. "Do we know who that is?" she asked. Walter shook his head. "Too far to ID. But he's not just passing through." Just then, there was a knock at the front door. Tom opened it cautiously. No one was there. Only a small manila envelope sitting neatly on the doormat. No return address. No postage. Inside was a photograph. Rachel gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth as she stared. It was a picture of Ranger, curled up next to Ellie's bed, taken from outside the house, through her bedroom window. The angle was low, like someone had crouched in the bushes to take it. Walter took the envelope, inspected it. "No fingerprints," he muttered. This wasn't dropped, it was placed. Rachel's voice trembled. Who would do something like this? Walter didn't answer. Ranger sat near the doorway, watching. He didn't move, but his eyes tracked every person in the room. Later that afternoon, Rachel called Frost and Crumbs. The bakery, she thought, had made the cake. Sorry, the manager said, polite but firm. We didn't have an order under your name. Not last week. Not ever, but I got a confirmation, Rachel said. An email. And the site, it looked just like yours. The woman on the other end of the line paused. Ma'am, our site's been the same for 3 years. No redesigns. No offshoots. Rachel hung up slowly. Her mind raced. She pulled up the email again. The link now led to an error page. Gone. Wiped clean. Her hand shook as she clutched the phone. Tom, she whispered. It wasn't them. I don't know who we ordered from. Tom didn't say anything at first. Then, someone made a fake site just to send that cake. Rachel blinked. Why? Why go through all that trouble? Walter, still holding the photo of Ranger by Ellie's bed, answered for him. Because it wasn't a prank, he said. It was a test run. That night, they didn't sleep much. Ellie was tucked into bed with a new nightlight and a quiet lullaby playlist playing softly from her tablet. Ranger lay on the floor beside her, paws stretched forward, nose inches from the bed frame. He didn't close his eyes. At 1 a.m, Rachel walked past the hallway and saw him, still alert, still focused, his ears twitching every time Ellie shifted in her sleep. In the living room, Walter sat with a blanket over his legs and an old revolver on the table beside him. Not that he planned to use it, but the weight of it was comforting. He looked at Ranger, then leaned down and spoke softly, like one old soldier to another. You know something, don't you? Ranger turned his head. Their eyes met. Walter nodded slowly. Yeah, he whispered. I thought so. He hadn't believed in that kind of thing before. Not really. But now, staring into those dark, knowing eyes, he saw something he couldn't explain. A kind of sorrow, a kind of fear, and underneath it all, something burning low and steady. Resolve. Over the next few days, Ranger changed. He stopped sleeping through the night. Instead, he made quiet rounds through the house, from the front window to the back door, from Ellie's room to the hallway, where he would sit for long stretches, unmoving, like a statue. Tom tried coaxing him to rest. Come on, boy. It's okay now. But Ranger refused. One night, he sat at the sliding glass door for over 2 hours, his body perfectly still, staring into the darkness beyond the porch light. When Rachel came down for a glass of water and found him there, she almost called his name, but something in the way he was sitting, ears forward, back tense, made her stop. It was like watching someone listen for a whisper, only they could hear. Rachel stood beside Walter the next morning as they drank coffee and looked out at the yard. We need to tell the police, she said. Walter nodded. Already did. They're coming this afternoon. When the officers arrived, they took the photo, the envelope, the camera footage. One of them, a young man with cautious eyes, listened closely as Walter recounted every detail. When he heard about the fake website, his face darkened. This isn't a prank, he said. It's surveillance, Rachel blinked. On who? The officer didn't answer. That night, just before bed, Ellie crawled into her blanket and turned toward the window. Is Ranger gonna stay? Of course, Rachel said, tucking her in. He's not going anywhere. Ellie smiled faintly and reached down. Ranger lifted his head and rested his chin on her mattress. And outside, the wind picked up again, but Ranger didn't flinch. Because now, it wasn't just about the cake, or the photo, or even the man in the shadows. It was about Ellie. And whatever was coming, he was ready. It was supposed to be just another quiet walk in the park. The afternoon sun filtered through the branches, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete trail. Ellie skipped a few steps ahead of Rachel and Tom, her small backpack bouncing with each hop. Walter walked alongside them, hands in his jacket pockets, his eyes scanning out of habit more than necessity. And Ranger trotted steadily at Ellie's side, head low, tail still. His leash was loose, but his attention sharp. They had come to this park dozens of times before. It wasn't big, a single loop around a grassy field, a playground in one corner, and a few benches that always creaked when someone sat down. It was safe, familiar, until Ranger stopped. It was abrupt, almost startling. 1 second, he was moving like normal. The next, he froze mid-step, ears pricked, body locked tight. Then he barked. Loud. Once, twice. It wasn't playful. It wasn't curious. It was alarm. Walter instinctively reached for Ellie, pulling her gently behind him. Rachel gripped Tom's arm as Ranger surged forward, nose to the ground, pulling them off the path toward a dense patch of overgrowth by the fence line. "Ranger, what is it?" Tom called, but the dog didn't stop. He weaved through the underbrush like he'd been here before. Like something was calling him. He circled twice, then began pawing at the ground, barking with increasing urgency. Walter was the first to reach him, pushing past the tall weeds. "Back up, boy," he murmured, crouching beside him. There, half buried beneath dried leaves and loose dirt, was a plastic bag, just large enough to raise suspicion. Walter pulled a pin from his pocket and used it to gently lift the corner of the bag without touching the contents. His police instincts kicked in, adrenaline sharpening his every move. Inside were several items: a black ski mask, a roll of zip ties, a folded paper map marked in red ink. Rachel stepped closer and gasped. "That's our house?" she whispered. The map was detailed, too detailed. It showed the neighborhood block, marked with arrows and notes, times, windows, vantage points. This wasn't random. This was planned. Walter stood slowly. "Get Ellie back to the car," he said, his voice low, tight. That night, everything changed. The evidence bag sat on the dining table, sealed and untouched, until the police arrived. But it wasn't just local law enforcement this time. A day later, a black SUV pulled into their driveway. Sleek and unmarked, out stepped a tall woman with braided hair, pulled into a tight bun, wearing a navy suit and a calm expression that did nothing to soften her intensity. "Nina Samuels," she said, flashing a badge. "Federal investigator." She shook hands with Tom and Rachel, then turned to Walter. "I hear you're the one who found it." Walter nodded. "I didn't find it," he said. "He did." He gestured to Ranger, who sat at the edge of the porch, eyes locked on Agent Samuels. She tilted her head. "The dog, he's not just a dog," Rachel said quietly. Samuels studied Ranger for a moment. "I've worked with 9 units before. He doesn't move like a pet. He used to be search and rescue," Tom added. Before he came to us." Samuels crouched slightly, keeping her distance but watching Ranger's expression. "We've escalated this to a federal case," she said. "This wasn't a one-time threat. We think there's a network involved, and based on the level of surveillance, you weren't chosen at random." The words hit like stones. Ellie sat on the couch nearby, coloring with a broken crayon, pretending not to listen, but her hand had stopped moving. Her eyes flicked toward Ranger. He looked back at her, calm, watchful. Agent Samuels continued, "We're adding Ranger to a behavioral tracking program. It's usually for 9s in active duty. But given his background and how he found that bag," Rachel cut in, "he's not going anywhere without Ellie." "He won't need to," Samuels assured her. "We'll be equipping him with a lightweight GPS collar. And if it's all right with you, we'd like to monitor his behavior for any patterns." Rachel hesitated but nodded. Later that night, as the family sat in silence around the dinner table, Walter broke the quiet. "This isn't the work of one guy," he said. "Not with that level of prep. Mask, ties, a mapped route. That takes coordination. You think it's a group?" Tom asked, rubbing his forehead. Walter exhaled slowly. "Back in my day, we called them syndicates. Now they call them networks. Same thing. One person might act, but someone else always pulls the strings." Rachel stared down at her plate. "What kind of person maps out a child's house?" No one answered. That evening, Ellie asked to sleep in her parents' room. Rachel tucked her in, kissed her forehead, but Ellie wouldn't settle until Ranger padded in and lay down beside her. Only then did she close her eyes. In the hallway, Tom leaned against the wall, helpless. "She's never been scared of the dark before," he said. "She's not scared of the dark," Rachel whispered. "She's scared of what might be waiting in it." At midnight, Walter poured himself a cup of coffee and walked into the living room. Ranger was lying by the window, staring out into the backyard. Walter sat down beside him. "You smell something, don't you?" Ranger didn't move. Walter nodded to himself. "You feel it." "I know that look." He looked at the collar, now equipped with a small blinking light, a pulse of red, steady and slow. "Just tell us when it's time," Walter whispered. "We'll be ready." Outside, the wind picked up, and Ranger never blinked. They called it a whisper, a rumor too faint to prove, too disturbing to forget, a name passed in hushed tones among investigators who'd worked the darkest cases. Holopath. For years, federal agencies had suspected that the group existed, linking them in theory to disappearances across multiple states. Always children, always silent, no ransom notes, no demands, just vanishing? But there had never been a trace. Until now, Agent Samuels stared at the board tacked up inside the command van, parked near the family's home. Photos, timelines, maps, scribbled notes. In the center, a printout of the map from the plastic bag Ranger had uncovered. Walter stood behind her, arms folded, eyes narrowed. "You think this holopath is behind it?" "I don't think," she said. "I know." She pointed to 3 locations marked with red pins on the map. All 3 were former cases with missing children. Different towns, different states. Same pattern. "And you think our girl was next?" Samuels didn't answer. She didn't have to. That evening, a call came in from a ranger station outside town. A hiker had found something. A cabin, half swallowed by overgrown brush, deep in the forest about 30 miles from the city limits. It wasn't on any park registry, had no records, no listed owner. Ranger was in the back of the SUV when they pulled up to the trailhead. As soon as the doors opened, he jumped out, not frantic, but focused. His ears twitched. His body stiffened. Then he ran. Walter and Samuels followed close behind, their team trailing through the underbrush, weapons at the ready. It took nearly 20 minutes to reach the clearing. The cabin was old, gray wood faded and warped, windows boarded from the inside. It looked dead, but something about the air was wrong, heavy, metallic, like the residue of secrets. Ranger circled once, twice, then stopped at the door. He didn't bark. He just waited. Samuels pushed the door open slowly. Dust spiraled in the beam of her flashlight. Inside, the floor creaked underfoot. Mold climbed the walls. But it wasn't empty. Against the far wall, pinned carefully in a grid, were photos of children. Some were smiling. Some were blurry. Some had names scrawled beneath them. Age, height, favorite park, routine. And one photo stood out among them all. Ellie, Rachel's daughter, sitting in the backyard with Ranger beside her, Walter's fists clenched. There was a table beneath the photos. On it sat a list, printed and highlighted, suitable profiles, age range 6 to 8. There were addresses, school names, play schedules. Samuels picked up a single piece of paper, slightly crumpled, tucked beneath the map of local parks. It was handwritten, in red ink. Not her. The dog saw. The words felt like a punch. Walter took the paper, holding it with gloved hands. They were going to take her and change their mind, Samuel said quietly. Because of Ranger, the team documented everything. Photos were taken, evidence bagged. The cabin would be secured, analyzed, dissected, but even as the place emptied, the sense of dread clung to everyone who stepped inside. That night, no one in the household slept. Ranger refused to eat. He didn't lay by the door like he used to. Instead, he paced the hallway in slow, tight circles, pausing every few minutes at Ellie's bedroom door. Sometimes he would sit and stare at it, ears pricked, like he was waiting for something only he could hear. Rachel noticed first. He hasn't touched his food since yesterday. Tom set down the bowl again, coaxing softly, "Come on, boy, you've got to eat." But Ranger just sniffed it once, then walked away, resuming his quiet patrol. Walter sat in the armchair near the hallway, an old leather-bound notebook in his lap, a habit from his days on the force. When the cases got strange, he wrote everything down. He scribbled that night, page after page, while Ranger patrolled. "Ranger hasn't blinked in over 2 minutes," he wrote. Posture alert, ears twitching. Every seventh lap, he pauses at the end of the hall, stares at Ellie's door, then resumes. He paused his pen and looked at the dog. "You know something's not done yet," he said aloud. Ranger turned his head slightly, as if acknowledging the thought, then looked back toward the window. Walter's hand trembled as he wrote again. "This dog doesn't just protect. He knows. Like a detective, without a badge. Like a cop who never clocked out." Ellie began having nightmares again. She never said what they were about. She just woke up crying, clutching her stuffed bear, her little hands fisting into Ranger's fur. He didn't move when she cried. He didn't shift away. He just stayed beside her, tail curled close, warm and steady. Every time she reached for him, he was there. The family knew something had shifted. They didn't say it out loud, but they all saw it. Ranger had crossed a line, from guardian to something more, something vigilant, something relentless. Tom tried to explain it once. "It's like he doesn't sleep because he's afraid to miss something." Samuels returned the next morning with grim news. "We've found partial evidence of other cabins. Same patterns. Same lists? And the hollow path?" Walter asked. She nodded. "We think they're not just real. We think they're growing." Ranger stood behind her, watching, waiting. He wasn't going to stop, and they all knew, deep in their bones, that whatever this was, whatever shadows moved through those trees, whatever evil followed children into dreams, it had met its match. A dog who never forgot the ones he couldn't save, and would never let that happen again. It began with the silence, not the comforting kind that settled over the house. When Ellie drifted off to sleep and Ranger curled at the foot of her bed, this silence was wrong, too complete. Like the air was holding its breath. Then the lights went out. The buzz of the ceiling fan died. The nightlight in Ellie's room blinked once and vanished. The digital clock on the hallway wall froze, its red numbers stuck at 2:07. Rachel sat up in bed. "Tom, I've got it," he said, already swinging his legs over the side. He fumbled for his phone. No signal. That's when Ranger growled. It wasn't a bark. It was a low, vibrating sound that started deep in his chest. He stood slowly, every muscle alert, his eyes fixed on the back door. Rachel followed his gaze. Through the glass, she saw movement, a shadow, tall, slow, stepping across the backyard like it belonged there. In the next room, Ellie stirred. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat up, as if pulled awake by something outside herself, and whispered just one word, "Ranger." The dog moved before anyone else. He bolted from Ellie's room, paws skimming the floor without sound, and planted himself in front of the back door. His hackles rose, his teeth bared, and then he barked, not once, but twice, loud, sharp, a warning and a challenge. The sound echoed through the house. Like a siren, Tom ran into the kitchen, flipping light switches that didn't respond. Rachel grabbed Ellie, clutching her close. "Stay back," Tom shouted. Then the porch light flickered on. Backup power. A dull orange glow spilled over the backyard. They saw him, a man, face obscured by a hoodie, arms tense at his sides, maybe holding something. He turned fast, too fast, and bolted toward the trees beyond the fence. "Tom, call them," Rachel cried. But Ranger was already in motion. The screen door slammed open. The dog shot into the night like a bullet, barking once more as he disappeared after the figure. The police arrived in under 10 minutes, sirens silent, lights spinning blue across the walls of the quiet home. Officers flooded the backyard with flashlights. Combing the trees, they found the man, but it wasn't who they expected. He was young, Late 20s, maybe? Shaking, sweating, claiming he was paid to knock out the power and create a distraction. By who? Walter asked, his voice low and dangerous. The man didn't answer. At the same time, Ranger had returned, tail rigid, nose to the ground near the front porch. He circled once, then barked again short, firm, deliberate. Agent Samuels, who'd arrived in a second unmarked vehicle, knelt beside the dog. "What is it, boy?" Ranger pawed at something half tucked under the bush beside the mailbox. A paper bag. Samuels opened it carefully. Inside, zip ties, a black cloth, a bottle of liquid labeled chloroform, and a small, folded map. Everyone leaned in. The map showed the neighborhood, 5 homes circled in red. Ellie's was number 4. Rachel gasped, pulling Ellie closer. Tom stared, jaw clenched. They were going to take her. Walter didn't speak. He stepped closer to the bag, his eyes locked on the items inside, then shifted his gaze to Ranger. "You stopped them again," he said, almost under his breath. Samuels stood, her expression tight. This wasn't random. It was coordinated. That guy in the yard? Just bait. Then who was the one giving orders? Walter asked. Samuels didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out a sealed envelope from the bottom of the bag. There was no writing, just a photograph of Ranger taken from across the street. A long lens shot of him lying in the yard, watching the road. Beneath it, someone had scrawled in ink, "He sees too much." Silence settled over the group. Tom broke it with a shaky breath. "They're not just after our daughter anymore. They're afraid of the dog," Samuel said. "And they should be," Walter muttered. The rest of the night was a blur of statements, evidence collection, and whispered fears. Ellie fell asleep eventually, wrapped in a blanket between Rachel and Tom on the living room couch. Her small hand rested gently on Ranger's side. He didn't sleep. He lay there with his head up, ears forward, staring at the front door like it owed him an explanation, like he was daring the shadows to try again. Outside, officers posted at the perimeter scanned the tree line. Cameras blinked quietly from the roof. Inside, Walter sat in his armchair. Pen in hand, he wrote one line, "Tonight." The darkness blinked first, because he was watching, and Ranger, tired, steady, loyal, was still watching. The days that followed the final incident were unlike anything the town of Willow Bend had ever seen. What had started as a mysterious birthday party scare became a full-scale federal investigation. The FBI officially named the case Operation Hollow Path and launched a multi-state probe. What they uncovered chilled even the most seasoned agents. Hollow Path, once dismissed as urban legend, was real, a shadow network, hiding behind layers of false names and abandoned buildings, targeting children across the country. At the center of it all, they didn't find a badge or a surveillance camera. They found Ranger, the Pitbull, who had once roamed storm-battered streets in New Orleans, who had nearly been forgotten after a failed mission, was now known nationwide as a hero. But to the Walker family, Tom, Rachel, Walter, and especially Ellie, he was never anything less. Ranger didn't understand the press conferences or the framed certificate Agent Samuels handed to Walter on their porch, naming him an honorary special associate of the Bureau. But he stood still for the photo, sat upright, head high, eyes alert, because that's what he was trained to do. Watch, wait, protect. He didn't care about medals. He cared about Ellie. And Ellie? She cared back in the way only a 7-year-old could. She painted a picture. With all the focus of someone carrying truth in a brush, it showed a large, strong dog, standing between her and the shadows. Behind her were outlines of other children, boys, girls, some holding teddy bears, some staring at the sky. The painting was titled in shaky crayon handwriting, "The Guardian in the Shadows." Walter found it on the fridge one morning and stood staring at it for a long time. That same afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the backyard, Ranger began to slow down. His body wasn't what it used to be. The miles he'd run, the injuries he'd taken both seen and unseen, were starting to catch up. His joints creaked when he moved. His breathing was heavier. He spent more time lying in patches of sunlight, paws twitching as he dreamed. But his eyes, those sharp, thoughtful eyes, never changed. He still watched the door, still watched Ellie, still listened to the world, like it might whisper something he needed to know. Walter kept a journal. He had for years, but lately the pages were filled only with one subject. Ranger. I used to doubt him. One entry read, I used to think a dog couldn't possibly understand the things I've seen, the things I've done, but maybe he understands more than most people ever will. Maybe he's always known. The town healed slowly. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid a pit bull now stopped to say hello. Children asked if Ranger could visit their school. The mayor sent a thank you letter with a biscuit enclosed. But Ranger didn't bask in the attention. He was never that kind of dog. At night, when Ellie curled into her pillow and the wind rustled outside, he'd rise still without hesitation. He'd pace once around her room, check the hallway, then settle beside her bed, his head on his paws, eyes open, always. One evening, as Rachel read Ellie a bedtime story and Ranger lay beside them, Walter stood by the doorway, watching them all. He didn't speak. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out his notepad, and scribbled one final line. We fear the dark because we forget who's waiting in it for us, ready to protect. He remembers. Time moved on. As it always does, the FBI wrapped up their field operations. Holopath was wounded, exposed. Several arrests were made in other states, connections traced to digital footprints that never would have mattered if not for a single dog refusing to eat a birthday cake. But the big questions, the why, the how deep, the how long remained unanswered. And so they asked if Ranger could help again. Not on the field. He was too old. But with behavioral modeling, scent tracking simulations, he'd done more than stop a crime. He'd changed how they thought about early detection. Walter said yes on the family's behalf, and Tom drove him to a federal training site once a week. He was greeted there like royalty, but every time, after the exercises, he'd find his way back to Ellie's room, as if to say, I'll do your job, but I know who I really belong to. One crisp October night, with the air sharp and clean, the Walker family sat around the fire pit. Ranger lay between Rachel's feet, tail flicking slowly. Ellie leaned over and rested her head on his back. Is he magic? She asked suddenly. Tom chuckled. No, Rachel said, smiling. He's just Ranger. But maybe, Walter said softly, looking into the flames. That's the same thing. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, the house quiet and still, the moon rose full and bright over Willow Bend. Its light slipped through the curtains in Ellie's room, painting silver lines across the floor. She slept peacefully, breath slow, hands still resting near the edge of her bed. Ranger was there, of course, curled beside her. His eyes were closed, but his ears twitched. The moonlight touched the scar above his shoulder, the one from his old days, the one Ellie liked to trace with her finger when she told him bedtime secrets. And in that quiet, still moment, the world felt just a little bit safer, not because the monsters were gone, but because someone was watching, someone who never needed to be asked, someone who had already chosen to stay. As the moonlight spills across Ellie's quiet room, and Ranger rests by her side with his ears still alert, we're reminded of something our grandparents always knew sometimes. The bravest protectors don't wear uniforms. They wear fur and a collar. If this story moved your heart, even just a little, please consider subscribing to this channel. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is more than a number. It's a sign that stories like this matter. That love, loyalty, and quiet heroism still have a place in this world. Leave a comment, share your own memory of a dog who once protected you, comforted you, or saved you in their own silent way. As Charles Dickens once said, what greater gift than the love of a dog? Let this story stay with you, and let it be the reason someone out there feels seen, protected, and understood.